Can you hear me online? Good morning, everyone. We just finished our winter Rohatsu retreat last night. So the center is very clean. You should see the basement. It's really like shining. You know, I'm kind of talked out. I've been talking all week. I'm a little tired of hearing myself talk. So I'd rather maybe we could. What do you want to talk about? What interests you about? Well, first of all, I just want to thank all of you. I want to thank the Sangha. We've had a good year. We've had some challenges. We've worked with them. We've come through them, and I just want to thank all of you for your practice, for the support, and all the things you do to support this Sangha community here in the room, online, all of you that come to the online sitting every morning during the week, the way you support each other, it's inspiring to me to be a part of this community. And I want to thank you for your practice and for carrying on the Dharma. So with that, what do you want to talk about this morning? What's on your mind? What interests you about this practice? Where is your passion? What is it that brings you here? Need a second microphone for the people in the room, and maybe just put it on a table here in the middle. Does anyone know about the environmental conference they just had called COPE 88? I don't know what that. I signed the initiative. I got something from Joan Halifax, Roshi, and I wasn't sure even what it was. And then I read that it was about holding the global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is I believe it was the goal of the conference. But I don't even know what the acronym means. Does it, Julie, do you know what it means? Anybody? COP 88? Anybody online know what that means? Okay. Oh, I'll have time to look it up on my vacation.
So I don't have a comment, I have a question for you. So one of the things I love about this place is that it's that we're not too rigid about how we think about our practice and our spirituality. So last week when I was speaking, you know, I had a quote from Pema Chodron, who's Tibetan Buddhism, you know, and we'll use other Shambhala or whatever. And I really love that.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you could speak for just a few minutes on what's the distinction of Zen?
Between all those.
Yeah, what's distinguishing about Zen?
That's a good question. And it's a fair question. It's good to be clear about what we're doing here. And we are very eclectic. I'm very eclectic. I've actually practiced in the Tibetan tradition as well, and so has Myogetsu. And I think it enriches our Zen practice, but it's a fair question to ask, what is Zen? How is it different than Tibetan? So there are different lineages in Buddhism, and there are different schools. So the big three schools are the Theravada tradition, the old school, sometimes referred to as Hinayana. All the Vipassana lineages come out of that school, mostly in Southeast Asia. And then there's a Mahayana school, which is very large, which includes Chan, which is a Zen, and Pure Land. And the Mahayana really mostly began in China and then moved through Japan, Vietnam, the West. And so Zen is part of the Mahayana school. And then you have a third school called Vajrayana, which mostly the Tibetans are included in that. And the Shingon Buddhist school in Japan is also Vajrayana. So each of those schools has a slightly different, so the Theravada, and I'm painting this in a very broad brush, and it's not, these generalities don't necessarily apply to the specific practices you'll find within Theravada. You'll find Theravada Buddhists that are practicing like Mahayana Bodhisattvas, and but in general, the Theravada archetype is the Arahat. That is a person who's attained enlightenment, who's reached nirvana, and has extinguished suffering, and is released from the cycle of samsara, of rebirth, in the cycle of rebirth, of suffering. And that's pretty amazing right there, that someone could reach that experience of the cessation of suffering, which is absolutely the point of our practice as well. But in the Mahayana school, you have a different archetype. Instead of the Arahat, you have the Bodhisattva, and then the Bodhisattva has the experience of an Arahat, of waking up, of being enlightened, being free from, being liberated from suffering, but choosing to, instead of leaving samsara, chooses to come back and be in samsara, and chooses to go last, chooses to be, in other words, the realization in the Mahayana school is, I can't really wake up until you wake up. My waking up includes you, and there's no way I can wake up and leave you. That doesn't make any sense to me. So my waking up has to include your waking up, and so I'm not going to be fully awake till you are too. So I'm going to stay here as long as it takes, and that's the Bodhisattva vow, is we're going to stay here as long as it takes to free sentient beings from suffering. That's a very big vow. And that's sort of the spirit of the Mahayana school. Then you have Vajrayana. And the archetype, and I'm not sure if I'm saying this accurately, but it seems to me the archetype in Vajrayana, at least Tibetan Vajrayana, would be Padmasambhava, the guru who was born out of a lotus in a lake and is very young. And when we get to Vajrayana, I'm not on as solid ground, but it seems to me Vajrayana is more about dealing directly with energy. And instead of dealing with sutras, they deal with tantras. But don't ask me to explain exactly the difference, but there is, and I believe that when you go deeply into any of these lineages, whichever lineage you're in, you're going to end up including the others as well. But it's fair to ask, what is Zen? And Zen is a lineage that began in China. We say Bodhidharma was our first ancestor, Chinese ancestor of Zen, and then Huineng was the sixth ancestor. We have a lineage that goes all the way, goes from our lineage goes back to Buddha through India, but our Zen lineage really begins in China, goes through Japan. And there are two schools in Zen. There's actually more, but the two most common that survived are Soto and Rinzai. And so Zen, when the Chinese loved Mahayana Buddhism. They especially loved the sutras that we're talking about, Tathagata Garbha and Buddha nature. They didn't much like the teachings about emptiness and shunyata. That seemed too extreme, but they could kind of get the sense that we might have the seed of this awakening in us. So they liked the Buddha nature kind of sutras. A lot of those got translated. So they began translating sutras from India and bringing them to China, translating them into Chinese. And then at the same time, you had the indigenous religion of China, which was Taoism. And because the Chinese never completely trusted anything foreign, so Buddhism came from India, they liked it, but they didn't completely trust it. They also had Taoism to draw on, and Taoism was very, very old, indigenous religion, philosophy, feminine kind of spiritual energy. And so over the years, the Taoism got integrated with the Mahayana, and the happy marriage of those two is Zen. And so my sense is that Zen comes out of those two traditions. And if we didn't have the Taoism, we wouldn't have the humor, we wouldn't have the sacrilegiousness and the poetry and the fun that comes with Zen, because Zen can be fun. But if we just had Mahayana Buddhism, we would have a lot of lists and sutras. But Zen is more than that. So I think that's the best way I can say what Zen is. It is this happy marriage of Mahayana Buddhism with the Bodhisattva Tao and all the wisdom that comes with that, and the Tao, the teachings of Taoism. Does that make a little sense? So
yeah.
So
I'm familiar with a lot of this. I was
yeah,
just interested in sort
that's
of
kind of how I
touching on it. The Taoism is what I've heard you.
Yeah.
The Taoism is what I've heard you in the last few months.
Yeah.
You include that
A
lot more than you used to, or at least that I heard. It could be just that I'm hearing it now. Yeah. And so I'm getting more interested in exploring that aspect of Zen. So
and if you look at the Genjo Koan, I believe that Dogen went to China, and at the time that Dogen was in China, Confucianism and Taoism were the air that Chinese breathe, just like we breathe science and secular, social. Our culture has its own myths and what we swim in. Chinese culture swims in Taoism and Confucianism. So Dogen picked that up. And you can see it in the Genjo Koan everywhere. Yeah.
So what little I know of Taoism, it was also very empirical, very much of the senses and very much scientific. They really observed, if they ate certain foods, what effect that had on them. So they were very present. And so that's that aspect of Taoism with meditation.
They were very they were like empirical scientists. They observed nature very closely, including the stars and the movement of stars. And the thing that's kind of unique, I think, about the Chinese mind, if you will, that's different than us, is that they actually see patterns of change. That's what they were looking at. They weren't looking at things. They were looking at patterns of change. So that's a different way of looking at the world. And I think that's a very rich way to look at the world, because then you're not stuck with the objects, you're stuck with, you're looking at relationships. And then the whole teaching of, well, not the whole teaching, but part of the teaching of Taoism is really the movement of yin and yang. And you can't have one without the other. It's like, and they say in Chinese medicine, they say everything is breath. The whole universe is breath. Whether you're looking at the biosphere where we are, or the cosmos, the stars and the cosmos, at every level, the Chinese observed that the world consisted of breath, the movement, the swinging of yin and yang. There's the movement out of yang, and then there's the return of yin. And that movement creates the space-time fabric of the universe they call qi. Now, according to the Chinese, that we are in this space-time fabric of qi, and we only see about 4% of it. The rest of it's invisible. And when the movement of yin and yang are in harmony, they create form. And the word for that form in Chinese medicine is organized illumination, Shen. I just love that. I love the idea that we are organized illumination. That's just terrific. It's so poetic. And there's no object there. You notice they're talking about, because they're looking at patterns of change, they're seeing things in a holistic way that, and Chinese medicine is like that. So, and this isn't exactly Taoism, but I had the good fortune to study with acupuncture, really good acupuncture teacher during the pandemic online, and he's in Portland. And I went with him as far as I could go, but he was teaching people Chinese acupuncture and Chinese medicine, and he let me be in the course because I was interested in the spiritual side that he was teaching, and I got as far as I could with him, and then I couldn't go any further because they're talking about acupuncture and very complex medical Chinese medicine that was way over my head. But I got as far as I could, and as far as I got with him was just terrific. And in Chinese medicine, if you come in and someone that's well trained in Chinese medicine, the Neijing is the text that they use. It's a very old sacred text that is all traditional Chinese medicine is based on the Neijing. And if you're a person that's trained in Chinese medicine, if you come into the hospital with a broken bone, in Western medicine, they're going to treat your broken bone because that's what you're coming into the hospital for. In Chinese medicine, they're not going to look at you that way. They're going to see you got a broken bone, but they're going to look at the whole person, your ecology, your thoughts, your emotions, the whole thing, and and they're going to look at the idea in Chinese medicine is illness is where the qi stops flowing in the body. So they're generally going to look at the whole person. And on a good day, a Western doctor might also do that if they, so that's probably more than you wanted to hear, but yeah.
I've been reading this wonderful book by David Hinton. He was his what is the word for the Gateless Gate? It's a book of koans. His commentary about Taoism, actually, and he talks about absence and presence. Absence being older, being emptiness, and that presence being like the relative, the 10,000 things, right, comes out of absence, which is a beautiful way to think about emptiness, actually, like thoughts, you know, where do they come from?
He's a great Chinese scholar and has written a lot about the connection between Taoism and Chan.
Right, so he's got these, on the Gateless Gate is the first book of koans that Zen students study, right? The first koan being, does a dog have Buddha nature? So anyway, he gives a beautiful history of Taoism and how it intersects with Zen.
Yeah, so going with that language, in Taoism, they would say, to create anything, first you have to have absence. We have many names for that: void, nothing, emptiness, shunyata. Everything starts with absence. And then what comes out of absence is some kind of movement of yang. Something comes out, moves out, and it goes as far as it swings. And then there's the return motion of the yin. And that swinging of those two is what creates the fabric of the universe. It creates qi. I think that's terrific stuff, but anyway, that's a little bit about Taoism. And you know, it's full of, if you read the Tao Te Ching, it's just really terrific. Irony and paradox everywhere. You know, the things that you think are true, it's almost always they're challenging what you think is the conventional truth. It's just the opposite. Yeah. So once I got involved with Taoism, and I was reading Dogen, I realized that when he says the Buddha way, that actually translates as Buddha Tao. And I think that's a better translation, because when you say Buddha way, it sounds like something significant to Buddhism. But it's that marriage between Buddha and Tao that I think actually makes Zen unique as a lineage. So that's my take on it. And then it develops other forms in other cultures. There's beautiful richness that developed in Japan around the arts. And the Yogacara philosophy of Buddhism brought forth a lot of artistic development: poetry, paintings, calligraphy, tea, all kinds of and the Japanese really excelled in bringing forth artistic creations in a Zen context. So yeah, so you could take something like the tea ceremony, which is this beautiful formalized ritual of giving and receiving tea, and they study, you know, people study to be a tea master, and it's a very ritual way of honoring the relationship of the guest and the host. And that metaphor is used in Rinzai Zen to talk about the absolute and the relative. So in the tea ceremony, everything is a ritual. Every movement is choreographed and done mindfully, so that the person preparing the tea is the host. The person that comes in is the guest, and you know, they come into the tea house and there's some calligraphy hanging on the wall, and the guest will admire it and talk and ask questions about it. It's this very beautiful kind of ritual way of honoring that relationship of guest and host, and really appreciating it, which I think is a beautiful, beautiful expression. So a lot of that, there's beautiful ways that each culture brings forth the teachings of Zen. And as well as in the West, now there's a lot of eclectic things happening in the West, because we have a lot of things are getting mixed together. So I think Pema Chodron's teachings are terrific, and Myogetsu is teaching mind training here. I see no problems at all with any of that. And if Dinan wanted to come in here and teach something about Catholicism, I'd welcome that too, because I think at the ultimate level of spirituality, these teachings are universal. But we are still teaching the Buddha Dharma, whereas Dainin might want to teach the Christ Dharma or some other Dharma. But the Dharma that we teach here is the Buddha Dharma, and that's the, so even though Dogen was steeped in Confucianism and Taoism, he wasn't a Taoist, he was a Buddhist, he was a Zen Buddhist. Clearly he was a Zen Buddhist, and but so I think we can receive a lot of influences and wisdom from other traditions that enrich our own, and then we integrate that into our own, and it becomes richer. And they take ours, and Father Keating took so many things from Buddhism and Sufis and developed a centering prayer for Catholics, which is just a beautiful, beautiful teaching for Catholics. And he realized, had the good fortune to meet him several times. He was now passed away, but he realized that the monasteries, for Catholic monasteries, had all these practices that were only available to monks and nuns. And he started taking those out for lay people to use. He wanted lay people to have access to those things. So he started taking that out, and he created this whole practice of centering prayer that many Catholics, oh my gosh. So there's all the integration. I met Father Keating in Honolulu the first time. He had been sick for many years, and it was the first time he was traveling, and so I was corresponding with him, and I asked him if I could come see him. June and I were on the island of Hawaii, so I flew over to Oahu. He was staying in some Catholic place. We had a long conversation. At the end of the conversation, he asked me, well, you want to go? I'm going to teach meditation to some Catholics. Would you like to come along? I said, are you kidding? Yeah, I want to hear how you teach meditation. So I went, and there was about 100 people in the room. And Father Keating was, first of all, he was elegant. When he spoke, he was elegant and just terrific. And the way he taught meditation, I'll never forget it. He's talking to Catholics, he's talking to Christians about meditation. He says, if you want to get to know somebody, you got to spend some time with them. Got to spend time, got to hang out with them. And then he went on about that for a while. Then he says, and if you want to get to know God, well, you got to hang out with him. That's how he taught meditation. I thought, wow, that's wonderful. It's so personal and relational. Whereas in the way we teach meditation is pretty dry. If you ask me, it's pretty analytical, sit upright, sit up, count your breath to 10. It's so analytical. There's no, and I just thought, well, that's wonderful. People can have different ways of coming to these they're called perennial truths. When we talk about the universal aspect of religion, I think we're talking about perennial wisdom that is universal, that is all religions are talking about love and compassion. There's not a religion that doesn't talk about love and compassion. And yet the expressions of that then take on different richness within each tradition. And so anyway, any more questions or thoughts? I'm talking too much again. Please interrupt me. Save me from myself.
I would like to say that the cavalry is here, but the cavalry is not here. Wait, where did where am I? Somewhere.
Here, help him.
Oh, there I am. Okay. One of the things that drew me to Buddhism and specifically to Zen was my study of mythology, which was with Joseph Campbell. He had a quote once that said, the great thing about Japan is that there's no fall. No fall, no original sin. And going through that time, that was like the focal point of the issues that I was having. And then from there, I found Roshi Jun through my synagogue. As I was reading Bearing Witness, and I'm like, okay, now what I learned from Carl Jung about synchronicity, I believe, because that led me down there. And then the fact that Roshi Yu and Roshi Jun went to the first 2 Auschwitz plunge retreats, the Bearing Witness retreats, led me there, which then led me to the next sort of level on my path as I'm studying this, and was in Auschwitz. We stayed at the Center for Dialogue and Prayer, and started hearing about Richard Rohr. And I read Richard Rohr, Living Christ. Now I'm in the middle of Thich Nhat Hanh's Living Buddha, Living Christ. And he partook of Eucharist and really talking about all the similarities. And one of the things that I found in my path, at least, is I used to try to find points of separation. What's different, okay? And how does that make me feel about being different or better or whatever? Now I'm searching for the similarities, looking for the points of contact, looking for how everything is the same. And one of the things I found about Zen is that, I'm not sure I understand the term, but I'm going to use it anyway, is the spiritual epistemology. Okay, how do we know how to be spiritual? How do we learn that? And one of the things that I've learned is that the sitting practice has allowed me to gain a certain knowledge of my spirituality that I've been able to reconcile back with my Jewishness and back through my Jewishness through Christianity. And for me, that's been that's been amazing. And I'm so grateful for it. I'm not sure where it's going, and I'm not sure I'm even making sense at this point, but that for me is, and I keep finding what I thought I knew, I don't know. And now that makes me happy. It takes a whole lot of pressure off, saying it's okay not to know. And I actually find my way through not knowing. And that's been, it's been another inflection point for me, so.
Well, I think one of the points to draw attention to there is that you can practice Zen and still go to the synagogue. There's no problem. There's no contradiction between the two. You can come here and be a Zen Buddhist, and you can be a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim, or there's no problem there at all. Father Kennedy was a successor of Bernie. He's a Jesuit priest. He's still a Jesuit priest, but he's also a Zen teacher. So that Bernie kind of broke the mold a little bit, because that was not, before Bernie, I'm not sure there was too much of that happening. Bernie had successors in other traditions, and that was a little unique. And then that, because I worked with Bernie, I taken that on, also that sensibility of interfaith dialogue, and also being open to people being able to be Zen teachers and be in another religion even, or to have a person be a secular Zen teacher and not be a priest in the Buddhist tradition. That's also, so we have 2 training paths here. We have a priest training path where you can, Myogetsu is on that, and June is a fully empowered priest. Myogetsu is on her way to becoming one, and you can become you can be a priest here without being a Zen teacher. A priest is empowered to give the precepts. and to officiate services and do funerals and memorials and weddings and things like that. You could be a Zen teacher here and not be a priest. And you'd be in a but you wouldn't really give the precepts then. You would be giving Zen teachings. And so we have two training paths, and often they merge. Someone that's a priest, like Myogetsu, is also teaching, and she's a very good teacher, as you all know. So she's also on a teacher training path at the same time, doing Koan study. So there's that. In other Zen schools, like San Francisco Zen Center, for instance, and this is not a criticism of it, we're just different. They would require that you be a priest to be a Zen teacher. You would not be able to be, they don't pull them apart. But Bernie did, and because I worked with Bernie and I saw what came out of his work, the kind of work that he did with many people, I also have chosen to carry on that kind of way of doing things. But there's a lot of diversity even within our White Plum lineage. There are people that would not agree with that would not have secular Zen teachers in their Zen center. So there's even diversity within. One of the strengths of Maizumi Roshi, he had 12 successors, and each one was different as night and day. It was Daido Roshi, who was almost Catholic. And he was so rebellious when he was trained. I knew Daido Roshi very well. We trained together at Zen Center. He used to skip the services. He was in the Navy, so he was naturally rebellious about everything. But when he got to his own place, he started a monastery that was almost Catholic, full of services and ritual and earnest practice. And then, so you have Daido Roshi, and then you have Bernie, and they're like two different, but the same religion, the same practice, but different styles, a lot of diversity. And it was the strength of Maizumi Roshi that he let people be who they were. He didn't try to put everyone in his mold. He always told us that he was old school Japanese. He was not, even though he was an American citizen and he suffered a lot to come to this country to carry the Dharma and teach it to us, he always said, it's up to you to plant the Dharma in your own soil. And he meant that. So I think we have a wonderful lineage in the White Plum. We have many teachers now and a lot of diversity. We have Christian teachers, we have again, I'm talking too much. Please save me, interrupt me, say something, ask a question, or what? Yeah, David.
Yeah, I have a question. So you're probably going to have to talk more when I'm done. One thing I was thinking about as we were talking about kind of what distinguishes Zen, I've come across the idea in many places that one of the things that distinguishes Zen is the emphasis on Kensho and Satori, kind of this direct seeing into one's true nature. And I was wondering if you could just talk about maybe for a little bit about how you think about the role of those things in Zen training and like how maybe those things kind of relate to training in other schools, forms of Buddhism, and then also a second question, a follow-up question, I guess it's sort of unrelated, was week before last on Thursday when we met over Zoom. You talked a little bit about, you said at one point during that there's a point at which using your will starts to get in the way of your own practice. Yeah. But then we also talked a little bit about how it was necessary to have a discipline. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the interface between will and discipline, because there's always points there, kind of inflection points for me, where like those two things seem to kind of have to go hand in hand. And I'm not always and frequently not feel like I'm skillfully kind of navigating that terrain. So.
Wow, that was two big questions. Anyone want to answer those? Well, yeah, well, let's start with the discipline and that side. Probably easier to answer than Satori. Discipline is required, and it's absolutely necessary to have discipline, and it's necessary to have precepts and training, following, having personal integrity. It's tricky. In the beginning of practice, there's more emphasis on the mechanics of meditation. So we talk about posture, breath, and all that stuff. And then as you move into Zen training, and you've kind of integrated the mechanics, then there's less emphasis on those things, posture, breath, and the discipline is now more about showing up, continuing your practice, being willing to be alone with yourself, and bearing witness to the wholeness of life. The discipline becomes are you willing to be honest with yourself and your experience and learn from bearing witness to the wholeness of life, which includes all your stuff, your pain, your shadow, the stuff you disown. So that's a discipline to be willing to, you can't pick and choose from the wholeness of life. When we're bearing witness, we have to bear witness to the good, bad, and the ugly. So that requires discipline to bear witness. And part of what you're learning as you bear witness is the self, yourself that's in it, is part of the problem. Yourself that's in the projection is not seeing the Dharma, because the Dharma is other than you. Dogen has a very interesting translation of this. We usually speak of no self or not self. The Chinese characters literally translate as not self. But Dogen translates this as other than self, other. What is no self? Well, no self is what's other than the self. And so when we are in reality, which we usually are through our projections, we're actually distorting the Dharma. We say the Dharma is pure. It's pure because it doesn't have me in it. My projection isn't in the Dharma. So part of the discipline becomes you make this discovery about prajna wisdom, that there's this another kind of intelligence. It's not self-referential. It's not confirming myself. And I actually start to love that because that's true. And my stuff really isn't. My stuff is distorted. My projections are just the way I want things to be. But that's not what's true here. What's spiritual about this world has nothing to do with my agenda. And part of what Satori is when I can actually see that. And I actually see it. And I get that this world is sacred. And I'm not in it in the way I would like to be. It doesn't mean I'm not included. But the way that I've been trying to make it my own has gotten in the way. And so now the discipline becomes getting out of the way. It's a kind of jujitsu move. It's kind of, yeah, the discipline is about being with the paradox. If I'm bearing witness to the wholeness of life, there's lots of paradoxes in life. There's lots of dualities. I long to be together with all of you in the oneness of life, and I want that. It's healing. It's really important. But I also have to accept that I'm alone here too, as you are, and that existential tension of what it is to be a human being is part of Zen spirituality, which is why I like it. It's existential. It's honest. To me, it's honest. That's honest. To bear witness to the wholeness of life is to be brave enough to see yourself and to see reality, which we call the Dharma. And the Dharma is spiritual and sacred because it doesn't have anything to do with the self I've constructed. So when there's a discipline I have to have discipline to have that prajna be present. I have to be disciplined enough to forget my, Dogen says, to study the self is to forget the self. The beauty of traditional Zen training, which is not necessarily what we're doing here all the time, but if you're in Sesshin like we just were, and you're Tenzo like Julie was, pay attention all the time. You can't be, in traditional Zen training, there's always something you have to do. If you're in the service and you're the Ino, and you're chanting for everyone, you can't space out, because if you space out, then everyone's going to space out with you. So the training is actually supporting the bringing forth of that prajna wisdom, because the prajna wisdom is, and you start to love that. You actually start to love it because it's not you, and it's refreshing. It doesn't have anything to do with me. It doesn't confirm me in the way that me would like to be confirmed. And then that's the kind of, what we mean by satori is when you really get that you are here, one in this world is completely, totally sacred, and you're in it, but not in the way you thought you were. If that makes any sense. And it requires discipline I think it requires discipline to see that, because we're creatures of habit, and we tend to fall back on defense mechanisms to reach for security, because the wholeness of life is, it's difficult. I mean, we have pain and wounds that we have to bear witness to, and grief that comes with that, and that's just, you can't do it all at once. You do it in bits and pieces, and you do it on a cushion by sitting year after year after year with yourself, alone with yourself. So part of discipline is, I think, is the willingness to be alone. And the paradox is that we're alone with each other. And that's beautiful that we can do this alone with each other. I wouldn't be able to do this without you being here. I don't know if I answered your question, but
yeah. I mean, it touched on a lot of things.
when I gave that talk, the saying that Buddha gave, which I think is very clarifying, and he always said this, is that I teach one thing and one thing only. I teach suffering and the cessation of suffering. And I think having that almost like a slogan in our training is very clarifying, because it helps you clarify your intention, your purpose, and not to be too crass, but the goal. The goal is nirvana. That's crass to say it, but it is. The goal is to wake up. The goal is enlightenment. And without that, this is just a philosophy. But we're not just a philosophy. This is a religion. It's a spiritual training. It's a spiritual tradition. I once said to Maizumi Roshi, in one of my more secular veins, which I am prone to fall into from time to time, I said something about, I was all excited about humanism, and I said something to Maizumi Roshi, this is just humanism. And he really just I just didn't like that at all. He just like really tore me apart. It's like, are you talk humanism? So without salvation, this isn't, it's just a philosophy. And this is more than a philosophy. We are a religion in the sense that we have metaphysics. All religions have metaphysics. Metaphysics means it's something that's not physical. Reaching the other shore is metaphysics. Science can't prove that. And without that metaphysics here in our practice of Zen, this would not be, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing without that, without enlightenment being the point. So I teach suffering, I teach the cessation of suffering, and I think part of the discovery that Buddha made, because he suffered too, was he learned how to bear witness to the wholeness of his life. And he had trauma. His mother died when he was 7 days old. That had to affect him. So he discovered that the way to heal suffering was actually to be with the suffering, which is just totally counterintuitive. To bear witness to the suffering is how we heal it, not by running away from it. And so that cessation of suffering is really Satori. It's Kenjo. And it's really important that we, that's what we're here to have. And why that's clarifying is if it's easy to settle for something less. You know, along the way, you're doing mindfulness and it relieves stress, or you get into neuroscience, and my gosh, I'm as guilty of this as anyone. Ask all the Zen Life teachers that I get caught up in this too, but that's not the goal. It's crass to talk about a goal, but it's actually important. If the goal is not the liberation from suffering, then we're going to settle for something less, and we shouldn't. But then, and this is the beautiful thing about Dogen we were just appreciating, he goes through the first 4 lines of the Genjo Koan, and he always says the best stuff at the beginning. And then the 4th line he says, after he's gone through these 3 different parts of waking up, you know, the absolute and the relative and the integration of them. And then he says in the last line, nevertheless, flowers fall without attachment. It's just when you thought, oh, I got Satori, now I'm not going to have any more problems. Burst your bubble. Excuse me. I had to deal with the Department of Revenue the other day during retreat. I almost lost it. I'm on the 5th day of Rohatsu retreat, and the guy on the other end of the phone is saying, now just slow down and breathe. Flowers fall with our attachment. You get up to the pole and you jump off, and then, so what comes after delusion is Satori. What comes after Satori? There's always the dialectic. There's the transformation, and then after the transformation, what comes after that is disruption. That's basic Taoism. And you have to have the disruption to have the next thing that happens. So what comes after Satori? Satori is not the end either. But then what would be? You see, in Zen, really, there's any archetype we set up is also deconstructed. So even though we have the metaphysics of enlightenment, once you say it, or once you have it, or you think you have it, then it's gate part. The supreme mantra is go beyond, going beyond, drop off the body and mind, drop off the dropped off. There's nowhere to settle and say, I've got it. And I think that's the beauty of Zen, actually, is that it's dynamic that way. It's easy to be complacent with spirituality. We think that we have something, and then we get sick with that because we get stuck there. So even Satori can be a sickness in Zen. It's very pleasant. And it's easy to get stuck there because, there's really no suffering there, right? But that's not the end of, then that becomes a kind of sickness if you hang on to it. But important to get that it's important that part of the purpose of practicing here is to wake up. And our tradition is telling us that that's important, and people have done it before us, and you can do it too. And then there's the other spiritual paradox, which is that we're already intrinsically awake, but somehow we don't see it. We project, our projections are in almost everything. And as we project, we put ourselves into the Dharma, and then that creates the suffering. You might probably got more back than you wanted.
It's all right. I can sit here and listen longer.
Yeah. It was really good question. So don't ask such good questions. I won't have to talk so long.
Roshi,
Yeah.
good morning, everybody. You reminded me of the story where the Tibetan student and the Zen student were talking, and the Tibetan student said, "My master can sit for 7 days and go without food for 7 days. He can fly through the air and he can know what you're thinking. What can your master do?" And the Zen student says, "When he sits, he's aware that he's sitting. And when he's walking, he's aware that he's walking."
Yeah. My master can cook oatmeal for breakfast. Any other final thoughts before we finish out this Sunday? I've really enjoyed being here with you, having this discussion. It's lovely to share about the Dharma, always lovely. And Roshi and I are getting ready to leave for a much needed vacation. We're gonna go to Southern California, get some sun. So any other thoughts before we close this morning? Again, I want to thank you, and I'm so grateful for each of you, each and every one of you, your practice, and I'm just honored to be here with you and to be able to continue sharing the Dharma with you. It's as anyone that's taught knows that you learn so much when you teach. Yeah. So thank you.
Roshi, thank you for a great morning.
Thank you, Robin. Have a wonderful Christmas season, everyone. Yeah. Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, all that.